Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative perspective on the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're going to walk through the claims, the numbers, and the arguments to really understand this stark relationship between global technology, immense natural wealth, and human suffering. We are essentially connecting the dots between what happens deep underground and what happens to the actual people living right above it. So let's get started. $24 trillion. Honestly, wrap your head around that for a second. That is the estimated value of the minerals sitting right beneath the surface of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, it's an almost unimaginable level of natural wealth. But the core argument we're analyzing today is that this massive fortune seemingly just slips right through the hands of the Congolese people. It is a staggering amount of wealth sitting literally right under their feet that ultimately just benefits others. Now, hold that 24 trillion in your mind and put it up against this next number, 300,000. That's the reported number of people who have died as a direct result of cuts to critical health aid in the region. Think about that. We are looking at two absolute extremes existing in the exact same place. On one hand, you have trillions in potential economic value, and on the other, a massive loss of life directly tied to a simple lack of basic medical funding. So this brings us to what you might call a massive paradox of priorities. Like, how do these two extreme realities even coexist? How can a region possess the kind of wealth that could fund entire nations while simultaneously experiencing health crises so severe that hundreds of thousands perish just from aid cuts? This incredible tension, this massive yawning gap between the wealth in the ground and the harsh reality up above, well, that forms the absolute foundation of the argument we're breaking down today. So where does this $24 trillion valuation actually come from? Well, it's cobalt, copper, and lithium. Now, these aren't just obscure elements on a periodic table, right? They are literally the lifeblood of modern society. They're the exact materials sitting inside your smartphone right now, the batteries powering electric cars, and virtually every piece of technology the Western world depends on. There's a direct, unbreakable line from the mines in the DRC straight into your pocket in your driveway. The convenience of our modern world is fundamentally reliant on pulling these specific minerals out of the dirt. But when you shift focus from what's being pulled out of the earth to what's actually happening on top of it, the narrative takes a very dark turn. It's trillions beneath and tragedy above. The source we're looking at argues that this massive, world-changing resource extraction is happening concurrently with severe, devastating humanitarian crises. And these aren't just isolated random events. They're parallel realities occurring in the exact same geographic space, which suggests a deeply troubling relationship between the extraction of all this wealth and the suffering of the local population. The situation on the ground is, frankly, stark. The reports cite 6 million dead in ongoing conflicts, a situation described as a genocide happening in real time. And alongside this, there's an active, uncontained Ebola outbreak with at least 131 dead and over 530 infected. And, crucially for the specific outbreak, there's no vaccine, there's no proved treatment available. The picture painted here by the source is one of absolute catastrophe, unfolding right on top of a veritable gold mine. This leads to a pretty sharp accusation regarding the international response. During a massive outbreak, you would typically expect to see vaccines, treatments, and robust response systems immediately deployed. But the reported reality? It's the exact opposite. No vaccine, no approved treatments, and a completely gutted response system. The speaker goes so far as to argue that this was a systemic failure, one that's directly tied to the massive death toll from those health aid cuts we looked at a minute ago. And this brings us to a really pivotal moment, the international intervention. With these parallel situations of extreme wealth on one hand and life-threatening suffering on the other, how do foreign entities actually respond? Well, when analyzing the actions of the United States and the United Arab Emirates amidst all this chaos, the commentary claims their priority was incredibly clear, and it definitely wasn't humanitarian. It was guarding mines over medicine. And this brilliantly illustrates the core contradiction presented by the source. During a massive health crisis and an active Ebola outbreak, the expectation is, naturally, the rapid provision of medicine and health aid. But the reality? The US and UAE didn't show up with medicine. They showed up with a check for $100 million to guard the mines. This stark contrast isn't framed as some unfortunate coincidence. As the speaker bluntly puts it, that is a priority list. Let's actually break down the specifics of that $100 million check. This funding is for a paramilitary force with a stated, explicit goal to secure the entire mineral exploitation chain. We are talking about deploying 20,000 armed guards across 22 mining provinces by 2028. So this massive mobilization of armed forces is explicitly designed solely to protect the mineral extraction process, not the suffering population dealing with conflicts and viral outbreaks. By laying out all these facts, we are essentially being asked to completely reevaluate the traditional narrative of international aid. We have to look at the relationship between the West and Africa through a much more critical lens. The speaker asserts that the idea of the West helping Africa has always been a lie. Now, that's a heavy claim, but it's one rooted entirely in this massive disconnect between enthusiastic mineral extraction and collapsing local lifelines. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is a phrase that anchors the entire commentary. That's not aid, that's management. It's a profound, highly critical argument. The point being made is that you simply cannot extract trillions of dollars in value from a continent, watch a local health system completely collapse, and still call yourself a helper. Providing funds to secure mineral extraction isn't humanitarian aid. It is the cold, calculated management of a very lucrative supply chain. Which leads to perhaps the most provocative assertion in the entire piece. The Congo isn't poor. The Congo is being kept poor. The argument here is that this destitution is not some natural state of affairs, but rather a highly engineered outcome. Remember that $24 trillion figure we started with? Well, it represents the exact difference between what the land is actually worth and what the people who live there are allowed to have. Foreign entities are coming strictly for what is underneath the ground, period. So as we wrap up this explainer, the overarching picture really forces us to connect the everyday devices right in our hands to the very real, often tragic human situations happening thousands of miles away at the start of the supply chain. It leaves us with a necessary, honestly pretty uncomfortable question to ponder. What is the true human cost of the technology we rely on every single day? And when we look at global interventions, what are the real motives driving international aid? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep asking questions.